Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Caresoft Technology would like to welcome you to our Solex Technologies webcast, Save the Database, Save the World. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. The audio portion of this webcast can be heard through your computer speakers, or if you prefer, you can use the dial-in displayed on the screen to listen through your telephone. All lines have been muted to reduce any background noise. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the chat pod on the left side of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation. If for some reason we do not get to your questions, our team will certainly follow up with you offline. To tell you a little bit about Caresoft, we are a trusted government IT solutions provider delivering software and support solutions to federal, state, and local government agencies. Caresoft maintains dedicated teams to support sales and marketing for all of its vendors, including Solex Technologies, SAS, Adobe, VMware, Symantec, and Red Hat. Our contact information will be at the end of the presentation, so please do not hesitate to call or email us for any of your needs. This webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the presentation will be emailed to you. Now at this time, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, John Ottman, Executive Chairman at Solex Technologies. To give you a little bit of a background about John, he brings over 25 years of industry experience to Solex. Most recently, Mr. Ottman was President and CEO of Application Security Corporation, where he led the company to a leadership position in the market for database security, risk, and compliance. Mr. Ottman is also the author of the book, Save the Database, Save the World. John, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dustin. Thank you, everybody, for joining while we just wait for the screen to load here. 1 second. Okay, so my name is John Ottman, and very appreciative to be able to present to you today. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Save the Database, Save the World, and I'm going to use that for some context on our discussion about database security today. Now, I don't know if anybody knows this man, but his name is Albert Gonzalez, and he is literally the Bonnie and Clyde of hacking. From between 2005 and 2007, he's responsible for stealing more credit card information than probably any person on earth, right up until about a few months ago when Target got cracked. And we know that Albert Gonzalez was not the hacker behind the Target breach because, of course, he's in federal prison today serving a term of 20 years. But even though he does look a little bit sinister in this picture, I'll tell you that the key thing about Albert Gonzalez is that he's an extremely proficient computer professional, and it was through that experience that he was able to build this rather illustrious track record of computer hacking crime. You know, and maybe perhaps you guys have, I suppose everybody's heard about state-sponsored hacking as well, and at the time when I wrote the book, I got a picture of this billboard in China, which is advertising right on the street for people to come in and learn how to be a hacker and join the Chinese PLA, their army, to join their division of. They have actually a well-formed cyber division, over 130,000 troops that do nothing more than computer-based attack and defense. And so, you know, today the threat universe for databases, when we used to think of it as just criminal, it's also now state-sponsored, and of course, with the revelations of Edward Snowden. Our own government is now implicated in a lot of those attacks as well, and so what we're seeing through what we know about the Chinese PLA division that does cyber warfare, and also our own NSA revelations, other revelations from Britain's GCHQ, et cetera, is that there's a significant amount of database security vulnerability, not just to criminals, but also state-sponsored actors. So it was in the context of this that I put together the book Save the Database, Save the World. And it goes through and reviews breach statistics and talks about enemy tactics and strategies and that can be deployed for defense. What are the key defense approaches that you could take, the attack signatures that are out there, best practices. Also, incidentally, it was interesting, the former director of the NSA co-authored the book with me, Lieutenant General Ken Minahan. He was the director prior to General Alexander, who's now stepping down. But it was very different just a few years ago. It was a very different landscape because we were really talking much more about criminal defense for sensitive data as opposed to state-sponsored. But at any rate, I guess the key point is, even though the book was written 2 years ago, nothing's changed except for the threat landscape has grown dramatically. The amount of breaches that have happened have grown dramatically. So I'll take you through a little bit of some of those observations of the growing threat, the tactics that are in use, the defensive strategy that we can deploy to try to protect ourselves, and also looking at some solutions. One in particular I want to talk about, which is called masking on the fly. Dustin, are you able to see the agenda slide at this point? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so some scary statistics. 519 million records breached since 2008. That was a pretty big number in 2008. It's more than doubled since then. There's the Ponemon Institute is responsible for this research, and they do new research every year, and really these numbers just keep growing and growing and growing. And the question is like, well, how is it that Target can lose so many credit cards, for instance? And the answer is that less than 10% of the world's databases are properly locked down. And 96% of these breaches are avoidable through simple and intermediate controls. In 2009, targeted attacks accounted for 89% of the records compromised. So, the point here is that the threat is massive, and really not much is being done to properly defend enterprises against this threat. So, the threats are obviously very serious. There are different sizes and impacts. You can have full-blown attacks, massive denial of service, or destructive attacks. You can have data breach, which is the most common. That's what happened at Target. That's what happened at Yahoo. Sometimes it's carried out by hacking groups that are really more interested in social causes, such as Anonymous, and they will breach data just so that they can publish embarrassing information about their adversary. Other times it's purely criminal, and other times it's for surveillance, and that's mostly from the state-sponsored side. But the sizes and the impacts of these breaches can be dramatic. There's different targets. Businesses, industrial espionage. There was a big play about 2 years ago that hit the press, coming out of China, doing a coordinated industrial espionage campaign against U.S. companies. We've heard all about state secrets and surveillance since Edward Snowden revealed his interesting information. We hear daily, weekly about credit cards being stolen, et cetera, and also military attacks, things like the Stuxnet virus, which was released on Iran's nuclear complex and damaged all of their centrifuges. That was clearly a military-focused attack on the infrastructure of Iran. So the threat's growing, and the threat is serious. And the cost of a database breach is growing as well. The big attack that Albert Gonzalez, who was the criminal who I showed in the first slide, he managed to attack TJ Maxx, and it was covered pretty extensively in the press. And studies following up that attack described the cost to TJ Maxx for the breach of over $256 million. And it's a difficult thing to assess exactly what is the cost of a database breach, because some of it is hard cost in terms of notification of people whose information has been breached, and new systems work and things like this that needs to be done. But also there's significant damage that's costing against the brand of the company. I think Target right now is probably faced with a loss of trust with a lot of their customers, and sometimes that's hard to put a number on a loss of trust. But the numbers are big, and the impacts on the companies that do get breached are significant. So as we look at this growing attack, and you look at the two different sectors across the private sector and the government sector, number one, there's just been a lot of successful attacks. Target, Yahoo, TJ Maxx, Heartland is a credit card company that actually does credit card processing. They were, up until Target's breach, they were the largest breach in history. But every year there's a new breach that's bigger than the previous year. Three of four energy firms had data breaches in the last year, and there's been a lot of discussions in the press about protecting the infrastructure of things like our power grid, and other type of industrial complexes that are vulnerable, and if they were attacked, could cause dramatic damage. In the government sector, we've also seen a lot of successful attacks. Certainly, the whole drama of the NSA revelations from Edward Snowden. Every few weeks, another drip comes out of Edward Snowden's hard drive, and we learn of more attacks. But these attacks have actually, at this point, have impacted U.S. technology companies in dramatic ways. Google is now talking about having to locate data centers outside of the United States. Cisco's been accused of having embedded malware in their routers, and a lot of companies have seen their sales actually eroded because of a lack of trust that the technology that they're selling avails themselves to surveillance by governments and whatnot. When Russia attacked Georgia, it was led by preliminary attacks on the cyber side. We certainly know a lot about WikiLeaks. So government sector, private sector, it just keeps growing every year, and the one common thread is that we're seeing a lot of successful attacks. So if we do nothing more than what we've done up to this point, we're just going to continue to see more and more and more. And I want to recommend a few opportunities here to try to change the tide. Now, what are we trying to defend against? Well, the common database vulnerabilities and threats that are significant and are accounting for most of the successful attacks and breaches really come in two different ways. One, there's database vulnerabilities. And database vulnerabilities are things like default accounts and passwords that don't get changed. So, for instance, when you install a new database, a lot of the credentials are default, and often they're not changed, and so they can easily be guessed. A lot of weak passwords can easily be guessed. A lot of patches that have been issued by database vendors in order to close off vulnerabilities that are known never get applied. And that's actually one of the most damaging vulnerabilities of all, because when a database vulnerability is known and a patch is released for it, everybody knows about it. And it's up to everyone to maintain the current patches on all of your databases. Otherwise, you're running an infrastructure which everyone knows can be hacked into. And missing patches is probably one of the single biggest defenses that people just don't take the measures to implement. It's a lot of work to maintain all of your databases on current patch levels, but it's probably one of the most important things that we can do to minimize the vulnerability. Misconfigurations happen all the time. Excessive privilege grants. A lot of times people will find themselves with credentials into a database that offer access much greater than what it should be. So access control is a major database vulnerability. Now, the external threat side, what we're really talking about is actual attacks like SQL injection attacks. This is where we're actually going to seek for ways into a database by hitting fields and forcing SQL to misbehave. And once we get into a database this way, we're able to implant malware to do all kinds of horrible things. There's also insider mistakes. People who might leave terminals open or leave their workstation open for someone to jump on their workstation when they're not looking, lose a laptop. A lot of breaches happen that way. Weak or non-existent audit controls are true in almost every organization. Some organizations take database security more seriously than others, but in almost all cases, even the chief security officers will say that the audit controls that are in place need to be improved. And then finally, social engineering is a major external threat today, and this is where people get tricked by answering emails or filling out information on the web to actually reveal perhaps a password that allows them allows an attacker to get inside a database. So these are some of the most common database vulnerabilities and threats, and none of them look particularly. Each one of them is all fairly solvable, but the problem is that it creates a very, very large attack surface. And if we're not putting controls in place for all of these threats and vulnerabilities, what we find is that our database infrastructure is really full of vulnerabilities, and that, I think, is probably the case in most organizations. Now, the enemy tactics. So who's behind these data breaches? Well, interestingly enough, the biggest type of attack is the inside attack. It's attacks by insiders. Over 70% of credentialed, over 70% of data breaches are carried out by credentialed users. So, in other words, people actually already have password access into the database, and that's when the difficulty starts. And this can happen in a lot of different ways. People can find credentials, they can social engineer credentials out of people, or privilege grants can be put in place for users that are greater than what they should be. So over 70% of data breaches are by credentialed users, inside users. 10 business partners often get access into databases, and that's another attack vector. So what's involved in a data breach? Hacking and intrusion, incorporated putting malicious code into a database to cause damage. abusive privileges, people who go in and use the access that they have to increase their privileges beyond what they should be so they have access to information that perhaps they weren't allowed to have. Physical threats can be made this way, to physically threaten people. Sometimes it's just errors. But most of the time, a lot of these are used in conjunction, so you'll have multiple attack vectors happening when you're going through a data breach. So the biggest thing that I see out there is that why are all these database vulnerabilities out there, and why is there such a strong threat? And I think it's probably because so much attention has been placed on perimeter security, and many organizations look at perimeter security as the first line of defense, and the thought process being, well, if you can't get to my database, then I'm not vulnerable. So if you can't get into my network, if you can't traverse my network, why do I have to worry about locking down my databases? Nobody can get there anyway. But as we just discussed, so much, 70% of breaches are by credentialed users. Half of all breaches are insider jobs. So perimeter security, it's necessary, but certainly it's not sufficient in order to be able to completely lock down and secure data. And the cartoon is well, the good news is that the moat's finally finished, and you got a whole bunch of alligators, and the people in the castle think that they're safe, but of course the alligators know how to swim. So they're really not. And so what we need to look at is protecting data where protecting, you wouldn't have a bank and just lock the door and leave the cash on the floor. You need to protect the data where it lives, which is in the database. And that's the message that we're really trying to get out. So can you always defend against an attack? No, you definitely cannot. There's no question that the attackers are always going to be one step ahead of us in IT who are trying to prevent them. But what makes most sense as a best practice, and what most security professionals will recommend, is a defense in depth approach. So as I said before, perimeter security, it's essential, but by itself it's not adequate. You also need to look at endpoint security. You've got to look at configuration management, anti-malware approaches, email security. There's multi-layer security model that every organization must put in place to reduce the possibility of a data breach. But even with all of these other protections in place, the recommendation from Solix is protect the data where it lives, protect the data in the database itself, and don't think that just because you got everything else protected that you can leave your database unprotected. 98% of sensitive data is stored in a database 99.999% of the time. So when you lock down your database with appropriate database security provisions, what you're doing is you're just reducing the opportunities for attackers to get at the data. If you're using HTTPS and you've encrypted your data in motion, then the question is, what happens when your data is at rest? Because when your data is at rest, that's 99.9% of the time. Once again, $7.2 million is the average cost of a data breach. 49% of breaches involve stolen or default credentials, and the average cost per stolen record is $214. So these numbers are just going up every year, and they're dramatic. So we've got to do something about it. So I thought, what I would do is I would spend a couple minutes here and make a recommendation on one thing that organizations can do, which is very, very high impact, and also something that most organizations don't have in place, and that's called static data masking. And static data masking is probably the single most valuable step one that anyone should put in place when they're trying to protect their database. Why? Because it's going to prevent an insider threat from going after a soft target. Remember, if you've got credentials, it's one thing to get into a database, but once you're in the database, can you actually retrieve something that you can read? Does it have value, or has it been masked, or has it been encrypted, and therefore it doesn't matter that you're looking at it. It's not helpful to you as a criminal. So data masking encrypts or obfuscates or de-identifies the information in your database. Static data masking is focused on non-production data. In other words, you've got your production environment, and then you've got your non-production environment. So when we talk about static data masking, we're talking about your non-production data. It's a very fast and efficient deployment. That's one of the most important reasons why I call it out as one of the best things you can do to secure your database, because it doesn't take a lot of time, it's not expensive, and it's fairly easy to do. It's also integrated into cloning and subsetting best practices, which is something that the database technology guys know a lot about. It's what they spend a lot of their time doing. And what we're talking about doing is implementing an actual control process to mask or encrypt or de-identify all sensitive data that's in the non-production arena. And it allows you to meet compliance mandates. A lot of people think that, for instance, if we're talking about credit card security, the organization that manages that is called PCI. A lot of people think that, if I just one thing PCI calls for is encrypting all credit card data. So typically what people will do is they will just encrypt that column in their production database, and they'll consider themselves having qualified for compliance under PCI because they've encrypted all credit card data. But the actual PCI requirement is not just for production data. It's for all credit card information that's on your network. So when you think about how much non-production data is out there, it's in many cases 5 to 10 times as much data as what we run in production. So there's a quick and easy process called discover, subset, and mask on the fly. And this is the process that is happening every day in a large database shop. And what it really says is that as you're going through and we're talking about non-production data here, when you're going through your test data management lifecycle, the first thing you want to do is discover where is my sensitive data? Do I even know what my sensitive data is? Is it credit card information? Is it other personally identifiable information? Well, it's up to the organization to declare and to set policies on what are the definitions of sensitive data. And once those sensitive data definitions are in place, there's a discovery tool which will go through your database and actually find every occurrence of sensitive information in your database. A lot of people might think they know how much sensitive data is in a database, but a lot of times they're wrong. A lot of times there's information in there that was not really obvious, and you've got to protect all of your sensitive information. So the first step in this process is to discover and go out and find your sensitive data and be absolutely certain that you know where all your sensitive data lives. Because until you know what it is and where it is, there's really not much you can do about it. Now, as we go through a test data management lifecycle, subsetting is really all about taking a production database and making a copy of it, but instead of copying the entire database, just copy a subset of the database because, for instance, you probably don't need to move all the terabytes over just to do the non-production work. You may need just a subset of that database. And it's not unusual at all for a large, for instance, Oracle database environment to have one production instance. Let's say that's 1 terabyte. And then they have a clone disk, a master clone, which is a complete copy of that production instance. Now you're up to 2 terabytes. And then they may have 6 or 7 other instances of non-production data, which would include development instances, testing instances, training instances, QA instances. It's not at all unusual for large organizations to have multiple copies of production data. So in reality, if you look at the total amount of data, up to 80% sometimes of total data is non-production. Now, the first thing you can do there is you can subset that data. Instead of making clones every time, you can just make subsets, so you can reduce the amount of data that way. And then once you've discovered the data, you've subset the data, then you can mask it in a single process and then validate that those subsets and clones are accurate reproductions of your production environment, and then you can go about your testing cycle and all the types of things that you do in your non-production environment. So this is really a best practice. Discover, subset, and mask on the fly for all of your non-production data. So when you discover, it does it automatically across heterogeneous data sources and across enterprise applications or custom applications. It can track HIPAA or personally identifiable information, social security numbers. It uses pre-populated rules and patterns that it searches for to actually identify sensitive information. And you can extend the patterns that it searches for. So maybe you've got sensitive information that's specific to your application that you want to search for. And it also can search metadata as opposed to just the actual data itself. So discovery is a very, very important part of the database security and masking solution. It's easy to do. Subsetting, I talked about before. You're reducing the attack surface. You're going from 10 terabytes down to 3 terabytes. So there's just less information out there, right? That makes sense. And you do that, you create a right-sized test environment. You don't need to clone an entire production database if all you're doing is a training class for some users one morning. You can just use a subset of that database. So database subsetting is a very, very efficient way to reduce the attack surface that people might be looking to get at. And also, it's got the great other benefit of significantly reducing your storage costs, particularly in non-production. We've seen storage footprint, total storage footprints of a landscape reduced by up to 70% through subsetting. So subsetting is a really, really good best practice even beyond security. Then when you you get to the masking part itself, we're talking about substituting accurate information for inaccurate information. This slide's a little busy. It's kind of hard to perhaps hard to see for some of you. But if you have a name, Peter Watson, let's just change that to John Mayer. If you have a patient number 112233, let's give it some other random number. What we're doing is we're de-identifying the information so that it has no value as sensitive information. Now, why not just encrypt? Well, a lot of times fields of data actually have to be processed against. There may be lookup tables or actual calls to fields of data where a social security number, for instance, has a certain number of digits and they're in a certain series, and checksums and whatnot are required in your application programming. So you can't just encrypt and do testing against in a non-production environment. That's why de-identification is a better approach for non-production data to mask it by obfuscating the data. And so, for instance, your credit card number goes from 4145 blah 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 to 67329 blah blah blah. It's no longer a valid credit card number, so you could give it to Albert Gonzalez and it would offer him no value. That's essentially what data masking does. It de-identifies or obfuscates real data into data that's just been changed and is no longer valuable. Masking on the fly is the ability to do all of this in one data process. So, for instance, on the left-hand side of this slide, you've got your golden master. That's your production environment. You're going to clone that, and you're going to create a complete copy of that database. And then from there on, as you create additional non-production instances, you're subsetting. So you're not just making full copies, because you don't need full copies. You just need smaller subsets. Maybe take a 500 gigabyte database down to a 50 gigabyte subset and save 90% of your space. And so as you subset, you're also masking at the same time. So this is a single integrated process. So when you're DBAs, or if you are a DBA, when you're creating a clone, we're saying not only take that clone to a subset, but mask the sensitive information all in that same process. At that point, really this data is valuable only to the person who's doing non-production testing type of work. So another opportunity here is that the main component here, the data masking software, is available from our company, Solix, as a free download. And what you're able to do is just go to the link here, and you can download this software, and you can build a subset on the fly environment for yourself. And I would encourage people to do this. Download the software and get at it. You can mask a database in a very short period of time. And if you add the sophistication of an enterprise control process for masking on the fly every time you make a copy of production data into non-production data, you can systematically, over time, by using a control process, ensure that all of your non-production data is now safe and secure. And if your non-production data is, in many cases, 3/4 of the total data in a corporation, you've really reduced your attack service significantly. So opportunity for a free download to really make a big impact on reducing your vulnerabilities. So at that point, I'm gonna wrap it up and offer to anyone who has a question, if they would like to ask a question, you can reach our company. It's solix.com, solix.com, or we are fully distributed through Carahsoft, and you probably have or could have existing relationships with Carahsoft, and I would encourage you to reach representatives there as well. And as you go into the process of downloading the free masking software, if you're intimidated by that process or less experienced by it, and you need some help, we're very open and willing to give you some assistance to make sure that you can figure out what's going on and get a project kicked off. So, Dustin, any questions at this time?
Yes, we've had a few come in. First one I'm going to ask is, can you consistently mask fields such as names across multiple databases, even if they are multiple data types such as Oracle and SQL Server?
Yes, it does support today both Oracle and SQL Server, and you can take, for instance, a Social Security field, Social Security number field, and you can discover, subset, and mask across multiple databases.
Great. Another question we have is, how do I discover sensitive data such as PII or PCI?
Okay, so we offer pre-populated pattern strings and formatting for a lot of the popular sensitive data discovery items, like a Social Security number or like a credit card number. So that a lot of that type of thing is going to come out of the box. You may, as an organization, have other types of PII or personally identifiable information, which is specific to your organization. And so the tool has the ability for you to create your own rules to search for sensitive data as well.
And then there's a question about how do I download the free version for masking?
Okay, there's a link on the website. I'm just going to click back. That's the link on the page there, if everybody's still looking at that page. It's solix.com/solix-se/data_masking_se.php. So that will take you to the download landing page. If you have any trouble whatsoever, get in touch with Carahsoft or put a phone call into Solix directly, and we'll get some support for you to help you get through it.
And they can actually click the link right there if they want
and you can
to
click
go
the
straight to
link
it.
right there as well.
Another question is, how long does it take to download and install the standard edition?
Okay, I think a download is I would say if you're gonna do a download, you should set aside an hour and a half. The actual download process doesn't take very long, but to go through it and to get it up and running, it's wizard driven. It's actually quite quick. You don't hopefully you don't have too many situations while you're doing the install where it's not clear, because there is really good instructions on the page. But in general, I would say from the first download to getting your bunch of fields masked in your database, might take an hour and a half. Of course, depending on how big your database is going to have a big impact. But it's really that's really not a lot of time when you're talking about the value that you're gaining of securing all that data.
And what is the difference between the standard edition and EDMS product?
Right. So the standard edition is the low-end version, which is available to be downloaded at no charge. The enterprise edition is really more focused for multi-database deployments, larger volumes of data. So there's a cap on the free product, and when you go through when you break through that cap, the software does become chargeable. So that's the way the product goes to market. It's a free download called Standard Edition, and then a purchase of Enterprise Edition for larger environments.
Can you schedule masking, and do you have a command line interface?
There is a command line interface, and masking can be scheduled. You can use there's a lot of scheduling tools out there, and typically a well-automated database environment is already chosen a platform. So depending on, it's extensible to a lot of Chef environments or Nagios type environments for monitoring and also automating a workflow process. So the answer to that is absolutely, and that's absolutely what we're recommending. We're recommending that the subset and mask on the fly process be driven down to an actual automated approach. So every time you create a copy of production data, you're going through this process. So you're always certain that when you're creating a non-production instance, that it's going to be secure, because it's going to end up on a consultant's laptop, and someday it's going to get left in an airport, and someday there's going to be a press release about the data breach the next morning. If that consultant's laptop had all of its masking, all of its non-production data properly masked, it would be a non-event.
Another question is, can you create custom masking rules?
Yes. You can create custom masking rules not only for the actual masking process itself, but also for the discovery of the sensitive information that you're attempting to mask.
And can you create your own search patterns?
And search patterns. It's also another. I think somebody's got our documentation out. That's actually another capability to put custom search patterns in place.
And another one is, do you have service groups to implement the licensed version?
So we have a services organization here that does support for large organizations or large projects. We can do those turnkey, or we can do those as sort of subject matter experts working with an in-house team. Further, we have managed services capabilities as well, where and this actually works with some of our customers, where we just do this on a regular basis for them as a managed service.
And I think that's all the questions we have.
Okay. All right. Well, Dustin, thank you, and thank you everybody for attending the Solix webinar today, and good luck with your database. Save the database, save the world. Let's make the world a safer place. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank our speaker, John, and I want to thank all of our participants as well as John and Solix for being with us today. We hope our webcast has been helpful for you and your organization. If you have any further questions or like to request more information, please feel free to contact Elias Borkosh at Carahsoft. His contact information is displayed on your screen, so please don't hesitate to call or email him. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.